Okay, so welcome everyone. So this is a brief webinar just about the neuropsychology area of emphasis at Palo Alto University. I was going to go through kind of a quick overview of the area of emphasis itself, what the requirements are, what the expectations are, and then also take some questions that people might have specific to the neuropsych training here at Palo Alto University. So do feel free to use that chat feature to type in any questions that you might have, and then I'll hopefully have time to get to all of them at the end. So the first thing that I wanted to do was to share my screen and to show you, just in case you aren't aware of this, if you go to the Palo Alto University website and you just search for neuropsychology, the area of emphasis is the first page that does come up. So this has pretty much all of our information about the neuropsych area of emphasis. And I encourage you to kind of go through it with a fine-tooth comb if you are strongly considering this area of emphasis. So we do say that we offer this according to the guidelines that are adopted by Division 40 of the APA, which is the Division of Clinical Neuropsychology. And this describes what the basic education and training of a clinical neuropsychologist involves. So to become a neuropsychologist, you would obtain a PhD in clinical psychology from an accredited program. You would have during that training didactic education, so coursework in neuropsychology and in neuroscience, as well as supervised experiential training on practica that you would obtain during your graduate training, as well as at least one rotation on your internship in clinical neuropsychology. The expectations for the field are that you would complete 2 or more years of postdoctoral training following the completion of your internship. So this usually is set up as a formal 2-year postdoc that you would apply to after you complete your internship. Remember that the internship is in general clinical psychology. The postdoc is the training that is relevant specific to clinical neuropsychology. So we designed our area of emphasis to fulfill the expectations of that didactic education criteria as listed by Division 40. Someone had asked in the questions I looked at ahead of time whether completion of the area of emphasis and then the PhD would make you a board certified neuropsychologist. That's not the case. This is only one component of the education and clinical training necessary. So we would expect further preparation at the pre-doctoral internship level, as I said, at least one rotation, and that 2-year postdoctoral level. So we do have the guidelines posted right here, if anyone's interested in looking into those in more depth. But because neuropsychology is a really complex field that requires an advanced level of knowledge of both the entire field of clinical psychology and basically the entire field of medicine, there are a lot more stringent expectations for the training of students who would become neuropsychologists. Now, with that said, the expectation and the intent behind the area of emphasis is that every student who completes the area of emphasis at PAU would be what we call board eligible, which means that as long as they do that one rotation in neuropsych on internship and that 2-year postdoc, they are eligible to apply for board certification. The board certification process involves a multiple choice written exam, it involves an oral exam, it involves submitting work samples. So it is a pretty lengthy, involved process. I'm actually going through it right now myself. So it's something that people typically do maybe within 5 years or so of completing their doctorate and their postdoctoral training in neuropsychology. So maybe I'll pause at that point before I get into the PAU specific stuff and see if anybody has any questions specific to kind of board certification in general. Looks like probably not, so hopefully I addressed everything. Oh, maybe is that one? Someone said, is the board exam the same one that's also taken by MDs? By MDs, so for the medical field, they have specific exams or qualifications for their residencies to get boarded in a specific area. So if someone were going to be an MD, they would get boarded in either neurology or psychiatry, but it would not be neuropsychology. So neuropsychology is its own specific field, but the board certification process was designed to be comparable to the board certification process that MDs go through. But again, that would be for a different field. Okay, so I think I'll move, oh, maybe. Do a high rate of PAU neuropsych students enter the 2-year postdoc? Yeah, definitely. So, and then someone else asked, is a neuropsych internship necessary to be eligible for neuropsych postdoc? So the clarification is that your internship is not in neuropsych. You're getting your PhD in clinical psychology, and you're getting your PhD in clinical psychology, and so your internship is going to be a clinical psychology internship. So you would have your rotations in therapy, individual therapy, group therapy, as well as some neuropsych training. So typically the expectation is that you'd have at least one rotation out of 4 or 3 in neuropsych specifically. The requirements set forth by Division 40 are that you would have some internship training in neuropsych, but it's not a neuropsych focused internship. So that's what the postdocs are going to be looking for, is that you have that didactic training during your graduate school and that you've had some exposure to neuropsych on your internship. Yeah, I would say definitely a high rate of our students go to the 2-year postdoc. If not, most, maybe all. It's a very small percentage that would not pursue that. And usually if they don't pursue that, that's for more like personal or family reasons. They might put it off for a couple of years, or they might kind of cobble together some, training that they would like be able to start their private practice, but maybe get some postdoctoral supervision. But yeah, the vast majority of them are going to that 2-year postdoc. It does take several years to complete the board certification process, to answer someone else's question, but you don't need to be board certified to start your career in neuropsychology. So you can still open up your practice, get licensed as a clinical psychologist who is competent in neuropsychology, and begin your practice then. So you don't need that board certification to start practicing. Okay, great. You are welcome. So yeah, I'll open it up for more questions at the end. But now I'll talk about the PAU specific expectations for neuropsychology. So, okay. So as far as prerequisites, the prerequisites are ones that you would obtain at PAU, typically during your first and second year, your coursework. So these are referring to courses in psychopathology and psychodiagnosis, which most first years take. Biological psychology, I teach 2 of the 3 sections of this class, and again, that's during first year. Psychometric theory, which I think is also during first year. And then these 3 are during second year: intellectual assessment, assessment of personality and psychopathology, and the integrated test batteries. So the expectation is that for students who are going to be successful in the field of neuropsychology, these are the core courses that are going to be a kind of indicator of their level of comfortability with that material, and their knowledge base and how much they're able to build that up during their graduate training here at PAU. So we would have an expectation that students would get an A or an A minus in these courses, and then they apply to the area of emphasis. So the application process is at the end of fall quarter of second year. So that does kind of give you your first year to take some of the foundational coursework, that all first years take, and explore your interests so that you don't have to commit too early. And then in your second year, you would be applying to the area of emphasis. I think I have a link to the application at the bottom that you're welcome to take a look through and see exactly what questions are asked in the application to the area of emphasis. But really just what I'm looking for is, again, that someone has demonstrated competency in their knowledge base in the core fields that are going to be most contributory to their neuropsych training, and that they are, focused on a career in neuropsychology specifically. So every once in a while, I'll get a student who says, well, I want to open up my own private practice and do therapy, but I know that neuropsych assessment pays more than therapy, so I just want to do a couple neuropsych assessments a month to help pay for the practice. We don't recommend that approach at all, and it does not follow the expectations for competency in the field of neuropsychology. It's not a field that you can kind of just dabble in and just take a couple patients here and there. As I said, it's extremely intensive. It requires a real breadth and depth of knowledge of the field of medicine and how it interacts with the entire field of clinical psychology. And so that's why it is such a competitive track to get into. And that's why we have that expectation to make sure that the students who are admitted have that competency with the material and are choosing a career that they will ultimately be successful in. So after that application in fall, I let students know in the winter of their second year. I always encourage students to try to plan their schedules ahead to reserve Tuesdays for the neuropsych track classes. So all of those classes are always held on Tuesdays. So I also recommend, this is a bit ahead of where you guys are at, but trying to plan your schedule so that the only required course that you take in that spring quarter of second year is the integrated test batteries class, which is assessment focused, and then my neuropsych assessment 1 class, because both of them are pretty work intensive, and it's really better to only have those 2 classes during that quarter so that you can really focus on them. So the track is built up to be taken sequentially. Every course builds upon the course before it, and they're all classes are held at the same time. They're all Tuesdays from 1 to 4 p.m. And typically most of the neuropsych research labs hold their lab meetings either before or after that class on Tuesdays because they know that students are going to be available. So starting in spring of second year, you would take neuropsych assessment 1 and then neuropsych assessment 2 during the summer. Fall and winter would be clinical neuropsychology 1 and 2. In spring of third year is neuroanatomy and neuroimaging. And then the typical expectation is that you would wrap up with cognitive rehabilitation as the final class. I put optional because some students don't have as much interest in cog rehab, and they have another interest that complements the field of neuropsychology very strongly, such as forensic psychology, health psychology, something like that. And so I allow them the opportunity to kind of substitute in that elective class. As long as it gets approved by me. They just have to request it ahead of time. So yeah, this was an example of some of the common ones that people have substituted. But again, because the field is, so intensive and so competitive, we expect that all the elective credits will go toward neuropsychology. We also have an expectation that you'll be doing other professional activities to advance your knowledge in neuropsych. So this, we have a student organization, the Association for Neuropsych Students in Training, or ANST. So this could involve just going to the talks that ANST puts on, or you could apply for to be a student representative for that organization, and that would also kind of look good on your CV and give you that leadership and service expectation. We also offer PAU neuropsych grand rounds multiple times a year. We'll have visiting faculty put on talks. I will often put on talks. We'll talk about clinical cases. I have a whole talk that I do about board certification. And I also have a talk that I do annually in the fall called How to Become a Neuropsychologist, where I actually go through each of the different years in graduate training and what tasks and opportunities you should be taking on to add to your neuropsych training. Let's see. Oh yeah, so that's where I link the applications, but that's not due until second year. As far as what I consider when I look at applications, grades both overall and in the prerequisite courses. You get a letter of support from your instructors, references, curriculum vitae, and your overall fit with the program. As I mentioned before, kind of being focused on neuropsych, those are included in my consideration of whether to accept students to the program. You do have to complete the full sequence of courses to actually complete the area of emphasis. We do have that expectation of maintaining A's or A minuses in that neuropsych curriculum, again, to make sure that you're demonstrating competency at a level that would be expected to be successful in this field. This is just talking about how during the classes, we actually have you administer a neuropsych test battery to a volunteer so that you actually, show that administration and scoring competency in addition to the interpretation and application of the results in a neuropsych report. At least one of your practica should be in clinical neuropsychology. That's usually done during either your third or fourth year. And your dissertation should have some kind of neuropsych component. So, even if it's not like a super neuropsych focused, if you, for example, if you have a really strong interest in trauma, and it's very focused on trauma, but there should be some kind of cognitive or neuropsych component to that dissertation. And I'm always available to work with students to advise them on how to incorporate that into their study. So once you do all that, you do the coursework, you do the practicum, and you have your dissertation proposal approved, then you can apply for the kind of just a certificate of completing the area of emphasis. Okay, so I'm going to pause again and ask for questions. Okay, I don't think I'm missing any. So let me take a look at some of the questions that you had submitted ahead of time. So someone had asked about the different kind of neuropsych research that's going on at PAU. We do have multiple research labs that are doing neuropsychology projects or have some kind of neuropsych component involved. So my lab, of course, is pretty much 100% focused on neuropsych. We do research on the effects of chronic cannabis use on cognitive functioning, as well as we look at pediatric sport-related concussion. Dr. Tillman Schulte is another one. He does research on kind of the neuroscience behind alcohol use. I think he's doing a little bit on cannabis use. So you can look for his description of his research lab. Dr. Stacy Warren is doing research on kind of neuroimaging and neuroactivation in patients with mood disorders, so depression, anxiety, things like that. Dr. Rowena Gomez is looking at aging, neuropsychology, and depression. I think those are the main ones that we have, but definitely feel free to go through that faculty directory. We also have many other labs that, complement neuropsych focus very, very well. So forensic neuropsych is a very common one that people like to That's common for people to combine, and so we have two forensic psychologists, and we can kind of incorporate neuropsych components to a forensic dissertation or to research in that forensic lab. So that would be Dr. Christopher Weaver and Dr. Amanda Phaneuf. Health psychology is another common one. I think that's Dr. Matt Cordova, who's doing some health psych research. Trauma is another one that has some common overlaps. That would be Dr. Lisa Brown. So yeah, definitely feel free to peruse that faculty directory and look at, most of the faculty should have, you know, or all of them should have descriptions of their research lab. They should have some recent publications, or you can look them up on ResearchGate. A lot of people are active on that and they list all their publications there. I'll take the chat questions. Oh, great question. Pediatric neuropsychology. Yeah, so typically for pediatric neuropsychology, we do have a couple of practica that are specific in pediatric neuropsych. There's one in UCSF, and there's one, I believe, in Sacramento that is specific to pediatric neuropsychology. So you'd have that opportunity on practicum. Dr. Stacy Warren was also, her training is in lifespan neuropsychology, so she has had some experience assessing kiddos. My pediatric sport-related concussion research, again, is assessing kids. We do baseline and post-concussion assessment of kids who are in athletics to look at the effects of concussion on pediatric brain development. So we definitely have both the research and the practicum opportunities. Typically, the expectation is that you would be trying to find, ideally finding an internship that has a rotation in pediatric neuropsych specifically. It's not 100% necessary though. It's a very, very specialized, like even as much as neuropsych is specialized, pediatric neuropsych is even more specialized. And so it's typically, like, the training experiences are usually saved for students who are further advanced in their career, because you need a ton of background knowledge about clinical psychology, about the field of medicine, and about like genetic and developmental disorders. So it's very, very specialized. And so the expectation is that you would complete a 2-year postdoc in pediatric neuropsych. And often that includes adult and pediatric, but that, I think at least half of it has to be specifically devoted to pediatric neuropsych. So I would say every year I probably have at least 2 students who are interested in pediatric neuropsychology, and they do go on to pursue that field. I don't typically, PBHC, that's pediatric behavioral health care, I think. That emphasis, I don't, I'm not positive about that. They probably might substitute one of the classes from that emphasis for COG rehab, which I would fully support. So there's like a child and family assessment class. They might sub in that for COG rehab. But typically, I don't necessarily think they're completing the entire area of emphasis. They're relying more on their practicum and research to give them that experience. And generally what I tell students who are kind of between, if any of you are kind of between 2 areas of emphasis and you're not sure which one, you know, would be a better fit, first of all, you have the entire first year to make that decision, you know, to talk to current faculty, to talk to people in the field, to talk to current students, and make a decision about which is a better fit for your specific career needs. And I encourage any student who is kind of between the areas of emphasis, ask me for a one-on-one meeting and we'll sit and we'll walk through like what your career goals are and what you want your training to look like. And we'll, you know, I'll help give you information to help you make that decision. But broadly speaking, just kind of in a nutshell that applies to everyone, I always tell students, go for the area of emphasis that has the more demanding expectations for developing competency. And usually that is the neuropsych. That it's just a very demanding subfield and there's high standards and very stringent competencies that students must meet. And that's why I usually recommend them to take the neuropsych area of emphasis and then just get the pediatric training in their research lab or in their clinical practicum. With that said, of course, I'm biased. I am a neuropsychologist, so I do encourage them to also talk to the faculty directors of the other area of emphasis that they're considering to get their opinion as well. But I think too, like just talking to people who are in that field or in that type of career that you want to pursue, that is really helpful as well. Great question. Let's see, the time frame to complete the track. So, and I think somebody else asked about whether you stay the extra year or not. Yeah, so more and more students in any specialty within clinical psychology are choosing to stay that extra year to make themselves more competitive for internship. I think within the field of neuropsychology, probably most of the students in the track choose to stay that extra year so that they can be more competitive for internship and also kind of have a higher confidence level that they will match for internship. With that said, every year we have a couple of students who really want to get out in the 5 years. What I strongly recommend is meeting with both myself and with your faculty advisor early and often to express that goal, that your goal is to wrap up, within the 5 years instead of staying that extra year. And then we can tell you, okay, here's what you're going to need to do to make yourself competitive. And so it's going to probably involve getting extra hours on a supplemental practicum in addition to your primary practicum. It's going to involve getting a publication or two before you're applying for internship. Probably developing like student leadership so that you demonstrate that devotion to service and to leadership skills in the field of neuropsychology. Proposing your dissertation early, defending your dissertation as early as possible. There's lots of different things that you can do to make yourself a competitive applicant if you want to apply during that 4th year. But again, with that said, students who do stay the extra year are much more competitive. And that's not specific to PAU, that's just nationally. And that's been true since I was in grad school. I chose to apply during my 4th year. I had about half of my class who chose to wait the extra year. They got really, really high quality internships, like best in the nation types of internships. So it is just a reality that, you're going to be a more competitive applicant if you stay the extra year and do those extra things to make yourself more competitive. But it's not impossible at all to match during the 4th year. So hopefully that answered that question. Is it possible to be involved in more than one lab, or what I think I mentioned about doing more than one area of emphasis? It is a little bit more difficult with the neuropsych area of emphasis because it takes up all of the electives except for that one last one that is kind of optional. But it's certainly not something that we're going to deny you. So if you wanted to do another area of emphasis, I have had students every once in a while who want to do the full forensic area of emphasis in addition to ours. But they do have to then pay for those extra electives that they're taking out of pocket, which is obviously what most people choose not to do. As far as being involved in more than one lab, I think that's definitely a little bit less common, but it does depend a little bit on the labs themselves and whether they, if they have faculty who have already collaborated with each other, that would be very feasible. If they have faculty whose interests really overlap, that would be really feasible. So like I think any of the neuropsych faculty would be happy to kind of collaborate with each other. We are a very supportive and collaborative faculty, especially relative to other graduate programs that I'm familiar with. And so, we're definitely open to those opportunities. But I think what tends to happen is that, students get more than enough work in the research lab that they end up joining. And it would just be harder to kind of add another collaborative project on top of that. With that said, the part where you would get the opportunity for collaboration certainly is in your dissertation. So for your dissertation, you have your dissertation chair, which is your faculty advisor, the person whose research lab you went into. But then you also have 2 dissertation committee members. And so most people use that, most students use that opportunity for collaboration where, they might be in my neuropsych research lab, but they want to do a forensic neuropsych dissertation. And so they have 2 forensic psychologists on the committee. And so that would allow for that collaboration for sure. Let's see. Any other questions that people have? There's some really like specific questions that people submitted that might be a little bit outside the scope of this particular talk. I went through the overview of how the emphasis looks. Yeah, someone asked about our internship matching history. We have a really strong history of doing well with the internship match. We are the biggest neuropsych program in the country that I know of. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And we have, specific practica in the Bay Area that set aside actual slots for PAU students specifically because they've been so impressed with our training and, trust that our students are going to be competent and do a good job when they are on clinical practica there. So that has given us a really strong internship match rate. Again, especially so for the students who stay that extra year. So we are, our students are going on internship at Dartmouth, at Harvard, at UCLA, at UCSF, at the Palo Alto VA. Really just absolute top name sites our students go to regularly. So the neuropsych students are some of the most competitive at PAU. And so that has led to a lot of success for internship and for subsequent postdocs. And I can talk a little bit more about my lab, but before I turn to that, I just want to make sure that I address all of the questions that people have about the neuropsych area of emphasis as well. If anybody has further questions, you can type them into the chat. So while you're thinking, I think the last one that I see that I didn't quite address, someone asked whether having ADHD or learning disabilities would impact their ability to administer assessments or be successful in this field. And so probably at least one student every year that I take has either ADHD or a learning disability or some kind of learning difficulty that they might either receive accommodations for or have kind of has contributed to their education. I've definitely seen students be successful in this field with those diagnoses. I do think it can be a little more challenging depending upon the types of skills that that each student personally struggles with related to that disability, and there might be kind of extra things that they would have to do to ensure their competency. But I have seen students be successful with those diagnoses for sure. Neuropsych as a field generally does require a high level of attention to detail. Kind of that perfectionism, triple checking yourself, especially for scoring, for interpreting, etc. And so that's where it can be a bit of a challenge, but definitely not impossible by any means. Okay, so I'll just talk briefly about my research lab, and as I'm doing so, if you do have more general questions about the area of emphasis, feel free to pop them into the chat as well. But as I mentioned, my lab kind of has two arms of research. We look at the impact of chronic cannabis use on neuropsychological functioning. I have a bunch of manuscripts listed on my faculty website that you can feel free to check out related to that. And then the other big component that we have is in pediatric sport-related concussions. So we do baseline and post-concussion testing for kids who are taking competitive sports. And we do, full neuropsych assessment, full medical history on these kids, and we also follow them over time. In addition to those kind of two primary arms of research, the other thing that you'll probably notice if you look through my CV or my ResearchGate is that I have a bunch of other manuscripts on various different topics. So I have done a ton of research on validity testing in neuropsychology. So testing to see whether the patient is actually putting forth their best effort. I've done research looking at the aging process and neuropsychological effects on aging, including like genetic vulnerabilities to aging, as well as some things with like depression and the effects on neuropsychological functioning. So I am kind of one of those neuropsych nerds where I find everything in the field of neuropsychology interesting. And that allows me to support students in pursuing a lot of different specific topics within this field. Generally speaking, if it relates to neuropsych, I find it interesting. And so students have been able to really successfully integrate their research topics with my interest in neuropsychology. So I'm pretty flexible as far as, there's an expectation that you'll be contributing to at least one of the primary arms of research or the research projects that we have ongoing, but I also do support students kind of doing a side project on a different topic within neuropsychology if they want to. So for example, I had a student really interested in executive dysfunction in patients with eating disorders. So we did a meta-analysis of executive functioning in anorexia versus bulimia. So I am fairly flexible in that regard. Someone also asked my style of mentorship. Generally speaking, I try to meet students where they're at. I try to, support them with the type of mentorship style that they are looking for. So some people want someone to kind of really be available to answer questions. They want to check in with them a lot, make sure they're on the right path, make sure they're not kind of making any mistakes. Other people kind of just want more independence and they say, just tell me what to do. I'll go off and do it and then I'll run it by you at the end. I'm supportive of both types of mentorship approaches. I think that people learn, with different mentorship styles. So I try to adapt as best I can to those expectations. And when students enter my lab, that's one of the things that we would talk about is, what are you looking for in a mentor and how can I meet that? And then of course we have periodic meetings where we can touch on that again and adjust as needed depending upon what the student wants. So I think, and also to kind of speak to that, one of the unique things about PAU is that you do have that first 6 months to get to know the faculty better and to get a better sense of like what it would be like to work in that research lab. You'll get to sit in on lab meetings if you want to. You can volunteer in labs if you want to. You can talk to the current lab students. So by the time you're actually applying in, I think it's April of your first year, like you have a really good feel for what it would be like to be in that person's lab. And I think that's a huge strength of PAU, where some other graduate programs kind of ask you to commit to a certain research lab before you've, sometimes before you've even met the person. And I think that's really difficult because the faculty advisor-advisee relationship is one of the most important and formative professional relationships that you are ever going to have. So I think it's really important to make sure that you have a faculty advisor that is not just a good research topic fit, but that is a really good personality and mentor fit. So I think I have addressed everything. So we can kind of wrap up, I believe, but do feel free to hang out and throw another question into the chat if I have not addressed it. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending. And thank you for your interest in the PAU neuropsychology area of emphasis. Do feel free to shoot me an email if you have any further questions. We really want to make sure that students get a good sense of what it would be like to come here to PAU. We know it's a big decision and we really appreciate that. So don't hesitate to reach out to make sure that all your questions are answered.